What it do, cuckolds? It's your boy, the Hater, and it's Hater Mania, which must also coincidentally mean that it's WrestleMania season. However, unlike subsequent years and years before, this WrestleMania, in my personal opinion, holds a very unique position. Actually, I shouldn't even say anything about subsequent years because for all we know, things could get worse. In fact, they probably will. But this WrestleMania holds the distinction of being the WrestleMania that nobody cares about, right? The reality is that nobody that is performing at WrestleMania has gotten sufficient exposure this year. Literally, let's look at the two main events. Of course, we have the main event of night 2, which involves John Cena, who has appeared about 3 times this year, and which involves Cookie Rhodes, who has appeared about 10 times this year. Then we've got the main event of night 1, also known as the main event that doesn't matter, doesn't count, that is part of the night that doesn't count, and that is not a real WrestleMania main event. And in that one, we got CM Punk, who very briefly has appeared like maybe on 5 Raws, and then a few pay-per-views. Roman Reigns, who has appeared about as many times as Cena has, and Seth Rollins, who despite being the person that's appeared the most, he hasn't appeared that much this year either. In fact, I would go out on a limb and I would say that if you took 2001 or 1999 or literally any year during the Attitude Era, right, you would find that someone like, I don't know, Val Venus or Eddie Guerrero or Kurt Angle or Jericho probably made more appearances and definitely had more matches than everyone that I just mentioned, all 5 of these motherfuckers combined, right? So that's obviously unacceptable. It basically feels like WrestleMania is just a bunch of strangers showing up one day and telling you this is important, despite the fact that they haven't worked hard to make themselves important, right? Like, think about all the time that was spent, let's say, between the Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens feud, which obviously was a disaster. Think about all the time that was spent with the Bloodline feud. Now, granted, Roman Reigns was part of maybe 5% of that. He didn't appear for the vast majority of it. He had his lackey bitch boys, Sami Zayn and the Usos, do his hard work for him as usual. But think about how much time was spent establishing that storyline. Then think about how much time was spent with a bullshit storyline of like Drew McIntyre doesn't like CM Punk's dog or whatever and stole this bracelet. Like, there's like 3 lackluster, boring ass storylines that went on for too long. Now, if they had gone on for too long, but culminated at WrestleMania, meaning if they started like 3-4 months later and then ended at WrestleMania, then you might make an argument that these are things that we're looking forward to as fans just because of the dynamics of what's happening, right? But the reality is that's not what happened. Everything so far, I think everything period, just feels thrown together, right? Like, ask yourself, does El Grande Americano versus Rey Mysterio Jr., does that feel like a WrestleMania match? Or does that feel like either a throwaway Raw match or perhaps at best a match that you might see at Great Balls of Fire 2 Electric Boogaloo? In my opinion, it's the latter, right? Everything is being thrown together half-assedly and haphazardly, like at the last minute, including the John Cena heel turn. Wouldn't it be more, like, it's like they did it the worst way they could have, right? Earlier I argued that it should have happened at WrestleMania, and I still maintain that argument. But if it wasn't going to happen at WrestleMania, they could have had it happen perhaps, I don't know, at the beginning of the year. Maybe after last WrestleMania. Maybe the Raw after Mania, Cena just destroys Cody Rhodes or something, right? And then we have a 1-year build of Cena as a heel, right? You're going to need a 1-year build because Cena appears 5 times. But instead, they didn't do that. And if they had done that, that would have been pretty compelling. But they didn't, right? Everything is thrown together. And as a result, I believe that absolutely nobody cares about WrestleMania. In fact, if this weren't WrestleMania, like we have like 10 matches booked. Let's say we had a 10-match, I don't know, crown jewel, right? Would anyone give a fuck? People would talk about how weak this card is, right? They would be like, I don't want to see AJ Styles versus Logan Paul. Oh, by the way, a lot of people got butthurt at me saying Nathan Frazier is just as good in the ring as AJ Styles. Now, a lot of people, I think, are biased, right? I am biased too because I love AJ Styles. But the facts speak for themselves. I gave a concrete example. the backflip moonsault, right? AJ Styles has never done that move as well as Nathan Frazier did it on NXT, and as well as Nathan Frazier has done it in other episodes, right? In fact, they had to animate the move on WWE 2K because Nathan Frazier's version is so much more fluid. I mean, let's be honest, right? So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying he's better, right? But he could be. I mean, he never will be because he's a WWE guy already. But if Nathan Frazier went to the Indies, he could easily have an AJ Styles type career, you know? Because he is good. He's talented. In fact, a lot of people could. The point I'm trying to make, and this relates back to WrestleMania, is that the fact is that since WWE makes no stars, all they can do is take people that are already established. Because those people, number one, come with a built-in fan base, meaning that you don't have to get them over. Think about it. WWE has done nothing to get AJ Styles over. He was just over because, number one, he's great, and number two, he was over in the Indies, right? And in TNA, and in New Japan, which is a glorified indie, right? The point I was making wasn't like, oh, look out, everyone, Nathan Frazier is the next big thing. It was the opposite. The point I was making is we're never going to see another AJ Styles, right? Because the reality is there's a lot of indie people that, number one, are getting buried, and number two, all the WWE guys like Nathan Frazier, who would have the athletic potential at least to be an AJ Styles, are going to get jobbed out, right? They're going to get Carmelo hazed out of existence. You know, we have a lot of people in WWE like Andrade, Carmelo, Ricochet earlier on before he went to AEW to do the same shit. You know, Lashley's not doing anything in AEW. Like, nobody's doing anything aside from, we hurt people, you know. But this comes back to WrestleMania because the reality is that many, many years ago, right, when WWE started relying on older guys and they refused to push the likes of Dolph Ziggler for good reason, namely because Dolph Ziggler's boring as shit and he's kind of goofy looking. He straightens his hair. I mean, come on, you know. He doesn't have an ounce of like real masculinity in him, and that's kind of his shtick, right? He's supposed to be this like Shawn Michaels, Billy Gunn type guy, but without any of the, you know, like face hair, you know what I'm saying, if you will. So the idea is, or the big muscles. So the idea is you have all these people, right, that are now going to be in WrestleMania that are not, you know, some of them are headlining WrestleMania, but basically almost everyone is an indie guy, right? Or they're a special attraction at this point, like Cena, Roman Reigns, and Logan Paul. Those are the only three guys that can be labeled as legitimate superstars or superstars in the making, right? I know what everyone's thinking. Logan Paul isn't a superstar. Logan Paul is a household name, especially compared to literally every wrestler there except for John Cena. People around the world know who Logan Paul is. Whether you like him or hate him, which is fucking weird to hate someone so much, by the way, but he is a superstar, right? Roman Reigns, I'm letting him in, letting him off the hook, because he's not known to be like an indie wrestler, so he must, therefore, for the sake of brevity, be coupled with people like John Cena, who are now superstars, who have a presence outside of wrestling, even though Roman Reigns doesn't. Actually, he's just a jobber. But everybody else is just an old guy who is getting their turn, right? And this getting their turn philosophy is what's damaging wrestling, right? There is no reason, for example, as to why, like, Braun Breaker didn't win last year's Royal Rumble. There is no reason for that. Why? So you can have Cody Rhodes win it twice in his late 30s? What is the logic of that? How many more years can you squeeze out of Cody Rhodes? You know, he might have a lot of years left in him, but is he going to want to keep doing this? Now that he's reached his goals, he's probably going to want to branch off into some other bullshit. I don't know what, because he's Cody Rhodes, but, you know, he doesn't have the marketability of, like, The Rock. But nevertheless, the point is, a lot of people that are main eventing nowadays are old people. And this has been the case for the last few years. You know, you had Edge, you had Daniel Bryan. These are older guys at this point, right? We need some young people. Last night, I was watching like some highlights of Randy Orton, and it's like Randy Orton was 24. And when you look at him, he looked 24 when he won the title because he was 24, right? He felt like a young guy. He felt like he was special because he didn't need to get to 40 to finally win the title. He was good enough to win at 24. I remember the thing that I saw, it had like, the first thing that they showed was him versus Hardcore Holly, right? And he beats Hardcore Holly with like a cradle, basically. And then JR is like, oh, what an upset, right? And it's fucking Hardcore Holly, you know what I mean? Randy Orton would then go on to become Randy Orton. And Hardcore Holly, we all know how that ended, right? So like, that's what we need more of. We need more people that can get it done at a young age so that we don't have old bags coming in and wrestling, right? Cena, I'll tolerate because he's John Cena, right? And he's not like, he's not like the age of Ric Flair or Hulk Hogan when they came back. But he's not that far, motherfucks. Like, how old was Hulk Hogan when he, left WCW? He must have been in his 40s, Yeah, he always looked older than he was because he was balding, but you understand me. The point is, people back then cared, right? But they didn't just care because we had Hulk Hogan. They cared because we had people like The Rock, Stone Cold, Shawn Michaels when he was younger, Triple H, Jericho, Guerrero, Benoit. All these guys peaked in their early 30s, right? And many of them were champions in their 20s or at 30. You know what I mean? Nowadays, that's not the case. And because in the last year, we're just talking about the last year, but you could say this about the longest time period you could think of, WWE has failed to make any stars. In fact, think about the people that have been on top these last few years, right? You got Brock Lesnar, who is obviously a special thing, but he's also an older guy, right? Lashley finally got his turn. Drew McIntyre finally got his turn. Other than that, it's been the Shield guys, right? To an extent, and Daniel Bryan. And aside from Roman Reigns, who is obviously the only star that's been made literally since John Cena, aside from Roman Reigns, think about that for a second. Everyone else that has had any meaningful impact in WWE in terms of winning titles has been basically an indie jobber. The only exceptions I can think of are going to be people like Kofi Kingston and Big E, who had uneventful and boring-ass title reigns that nobody cared about, right? And quite frankly, Big E, whatever, I don't even count his title reign, but Kofi Kingston is like a Mark Henry in the sense that he's just another guy that got his turn. Like Christian Cage, people that I like, don't get me wrong, I like all three of these guys. But you understand what I'm getting at here, right? We don't have any young guy that's just like a menace, Like a 25-year-old can't fucking win a match in WWE. They're losing to people in their 30s, which is fine. I have no problem with that. 30s is still young, but it's not young to main event everything, right? And it's sure as shit is not young to start main eventing like Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre, who were fucking mid-card nobodies for 95% of their careers. This shit's gonna stick with them forever. It doesn't matter if Cody Rhodes main events the next 5 WrestleManias. The reality is, there was about 10 WrestleManias that Cody Rhodes wasn't even in or had an irrelevant role because he was pegged to be a mid-carder, right? That's exactly how it is. Now, the hater says it like it is always. And as a result of everything I just said, I believe that nobody really cares about this WrestleMania. This feels like WrestleMania before we had remember WrestleMania 21? Or during that time, right? When we had all these young guys that were main eventing, right? Orton, Cena, Batista to a lesser extent, but Batista was just a young guy in the sense that he didn't spend time in the indies as far as anybody knew, and he was presented as a young guy. He was the young guy in Evolution, even though he was closer to Triple H in age than he was to Randy Orton, I think. But anyways, point is, we had young, fresh people nowadays, and that's really it, right? It's not even young, it's fresh, right? There's nothing fresh about Lashley coming back and becoming a champion, or Cody Rhodes coming back and becoming a champion, right? It just feels like the people that couldn't do it in the past now do it because they're not as shitty as they were, I guess. But in reality, it's just that the competition's shittier. Lashley had to compete with even people like Test, Test, if Test was around today, he'd be a multiple-time world champion. Rest in peace, because he's competing with Seth Rollins. Nowadays, the standards have gone down so far. They have made me, and I personally believe, countless others not give a flying fuck about WrestleMania. I don't care at all. I am literally looking forward more to what happens after WrestleMania. I don't care about WrestleMania. Nothing's gonna happen. The hater talked to one of his good buddies, who's actually a wrestling guy, and he said, I know for sure that John Cena is gonna win. And I don't agree, right? I think Cena's going to lose. And if Cena loses, well, you might as well just, not even have the WrestleMania at this point. That's probably the best argument Cena's going to win. The argument is, if Cena doesn't win, then nothing has happened this WrestleMania. Remember WrestleMania 15? Where, in the show, there was, 3 turns, that all revolved around one thing, but that ultimately led to, a completely different landscape the following year. Triple H went from like having a random ass match against Kane, WrestleMania 15, to main eventing WrestleMania 2000, right? And then subsequently being in the main event for the rest of his career. Think about that. That's the problem that we have today. We don't have anybody that is at the peak, right? We don't have anybody that is pegged to be next. The closest thing is Braun Breaker, and he's riddled in this bullshit Intercontinental title match when that should have happened last year, and this year he should just go and squash Gunther immediately, right? Like, I don't think there's anyone better suited to be the inferior champion than Braun Strowman. He can actually bring prestige, and he can go on like a long undefeated streak. But instead, they're giving us Gunther, and they're giving us Cookie Rhodes. Think about it. Since King of the Ring, when Gunther got the right to wrestle for the world title, and since he was obviously going to beat Damian Priest, nobody like thought otherwise, right? Or whoever the fuck, who did he beat? I think it was Damian Priest, right? Like, he was pegged to be that guy. Since then, we've had literally no upward movement. And upward movement, and even downward movement, is what makes WrestleMania compelling, right? The idea is, what has this year led us up to? And right now, this year is by far a filler year, motherfucks. Nobody cares about WrestleMania, and nobody cares about this filler ass year. You dig?